Language and Literature at Western Kentucky University. He's an itinerant circuit riding teacher this summer at the University of Tennessee and at Appalachian State University, I believe. And he's a right busy fella. He has several collections of poetry. As most of you know, he's a frequent contributor to various magazines, poetry, criticism, biography, and whatnot. It's a pleasure to have Jim Wayne Miller here.
Thank you very much, Loyal. Those of you sitting out there this morning may have got the impression that James Still is a rather controversial fellow. There's differences of opinion as just to what kind of fellow he is. Well, as Loyal says, I've been running with James Still various places, and the very fact that I've been running with him ought to dispel that notion that he's a recluse. I think I might be able to shed some light on this question. We've all been moving around the circle, you know, as the Frost poem says, we move around the circle and suppose, but the secret sits in the middle and knows. Here he sits this morning, and he's already on record as saying, people have told me that I'm an enigma. Woodrow Ambergy, who has known me for over 30 years, told me once he didn't understand me. I'm as simple as the sun. The only secrets I have are those of other people, my own vanity. I'm proud of my Phi Beta Kappa key, and when I feel especially ignorant, I wear it out of sight. Well, I see no reason why we shouldn't take Jim Still at his word. What more appropriate thing to do for a writer than to take him or her at his word? So what I want to do for a few minutes here is simply to look at some of his very best words as they are to be found in the Wolfbin poems, the collected poems. I want to call attention to that newly published volume, and let's see if he cannot reveal himself through his words. River of Earth is the title not only of his novel, but is the title of one of the poems in this collection. And although oftentimes he's speaking of a person in these poems in the third person, that person may well be James Still himself. As in this poem, he drank the bright air into his throat and cast a glance across the shattered thrust of hills. And he knew that of all men who slept and waked suddenly, he, least of all, could name this thing that held him here. He least could put the sound upon his tongue and build the spoken words that all might know and might speak themselves and might write in flowing script for those who come upon this place in curious search, knowing this land for what it is. So he's talking about his chosen place here and of the difficulty of saying to himself and to others what is the magic and the fascination that binds him here. Further in this poem, he refers to the thing laid open, the hills translated. And he doesn't profess to be able to name that thing, but he asserts only he, meaning this person in his poem, he can but stand, a stranger on familiar slopes, and drink the tasteless air, knowing that beneath his feet, beneath his probing eyes, a river of earth flows down the strident centuries. Hills are but waves cast up to fall again, and to rise still further down the years. And men are held here within a mighty tide swept onward toward the final sea. Even in that early poem, he was working toward what I consider to be James Still's central metaphor, and that is the notion of the river of earth, as he formulated it a little bit later in a sermon delivered by a Reverend Brother Sim Moberly in the River of Earth. And Brother Moberly says, "I was born in a ridge pocket. I never seed the sunball without heist in my chin. My eyes were sot upon the hills from the beginning. Till I come on the word in this good book, I used to think a mountain was the standingest object in the sight of God. But these hills are just dirt waves washing through eternity. My brethren, there ain't a valley so low but what it'll rise again. There ain't a hill a-standing so proud but it'll sink to the low ground of sorrow. Oh, my children, where are we going on this mighty river of earth? A-borning and begetting and a-dying, the living and the dead riding the waters. Where are its sweepings?" And that thought runs all the way through James Still's novel, River of Earth. The mother, Alpha Baldridge, complains in the River of Earth. She says, "We're forever moving yon and back, settling down nowhere for good and all, searching for God knows what. Where are we expecting to draw up to?" Which is a different way of asking that same question. So that the themes sounded in this novel are then varied, much as you would find in a musical composition or in a symphony. Uncle Jolly, a character in the novel, says, while he's teaching the young narrator to plow, "What's folks going to live on when these hills wear down to a nub?" Again, asking a similar kind of question. Well, James Still is probing this reality, and he's expressing himself, because he never reveals himself more fully than when he seems to be concealing. And he never conceals more effectively than when he seems to be presenting you with something. You have to watch that in the writing, but it's the writing's the place to go. I think you begin to see what his preferences are if you look through the poems in the Wolfbin poems. And one of the things that he prizes is that which is wild and untamed and that which is free. In the poem In Fair, in this collection, he's writing about the marriage of a mountain man and woman, and he describes them this way. "He was sun-bronzed, resolute and free, who buckled his belt against the universe and challenged the taut rope of mortality. She, the sweet apples from high green orchards, the faint gray line of day within a purple land, the slender willow, the sudden piping voice, a crystal from the flint beds of the coves, whose strength lay in the wildness of her choice." James Still's strength, I suggest to you, lies in the wildness of the choice he made by way of a vocation and a calling, by way of a place to live. Even when he's describing animals, it is this identification with the wild and the free and the untamed, as he describes it in Horse Swapping. The throng of stallions champing their bits and straining new leather with arrogant heads. And he describes the foals who toss unbound heads with a flash of hock and unsheared flowing manes, flexing clumsy legs and short unhindered quests down the aisles of sand to the hill's uplifted girth. An untamed heart is swift upon the earth. Still's is the unhindered quest and the untamed heart. And when he's talking about people of his place, those people he has observed, again, you can go to the characterizations, as in this character sketch of a man called Banjo Bill Brewer, who's described this way. Singing he goes, wrapped in the garment of ballads, and his songs are his own, and his banjo shaped by his own skilled hands. This is his own true love he grieves, these his winding lonesome valleys blowing with perished leaves and winds that starve in the chestnut oaks, and these the deaths he dies. His voice is the whispering water, the speech of a dove. The banjo is part of him, his waking and his sleeping. It is the bread and mast. It is his heart's peace, where his heart's peace lies. It is his tongue for joy. It is his eyes for weeping. James Still prefers and has preferred and has made his life out of that preference for the wild and for the untamed, and he's always been a seeker and a rover. In the broken ibis, he says, if the legs of the bird be broken, the arrow-legged ibis, earth-pent, and on wearying wings, having spent her final flight, sinking at last to the dark lake, to death bespoken, how may I, who am seeker and rover, design from wisdom of eagle and dove a philosophy wherein the lover must slay his love? And there is that emphasis on the seeker. And in a poem called Eyes in the Grass, this seeker and rover conceals himself. His perspective and line of vision is completely eradicated, so that you don't see the teller of the poem in the same way that you often have no narrator or almost no narrator in the stories and novels. It's an immediate happening. But here's Eyes in the Grass. A rusty grackle walks the apple's bough. He wanders through a green cloth of leaves with back arched impudently and pauses, plump-bodied and balanced, searching beneath. There are eyes in the grass, eyes lying still beneath stalk and pod where doodles drill their earthen cones and ants march in a forest of living swords. I think that neither the grackle's black eyes nor the ant's myopic sight has found me here, drowned in quivering stems, lost in wattled twigs of grass trees. Oh, I am lost to any wandering view. I am hill uncharted. My breathing is the wind. I am horizon. I am earth's far end. So you find him, out in a wild place. You have him making himself invisible. And even when he's describing something as simple and as common as apples, you find in the description his preference for the wild, the unpredictable, the unexpected. Everything he touches becomes a revelation of himself in a way. And that's a mark of his indirection. In the poem called Apples, look how this works. He says, now that they've set a standard for the apple by choosing its forebears and placing it on a diet and mellowing its shoulders red, yellow, or green according to chemi-fancy and current market fiat, and brought it to a norm in tests and dapples, it's hard to find a fruit that's individual. I praise the factory tree, the 30-peck supremacy over the 10-peck tree. I hail the standardization of fruit as rounding as doorknobs, as waxy as wax. The eating's the thing, not the explanation. I acknowledge, the debt to society of apples and facts, to men and grafts that made the tree a hummer, to pomological genius for developing a steady comer. My old-time trees are doubtful from season to season, though usually they bear in vagrant, wild, sweet unreason. But my apples are the ones to eat for the taste of summer. Still, too, has borne his literary fruits in wild, sweet unreason, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. So if you're looking for James Still, look for James Still in the best part of him, in his words, in his prose, and in his poetry. And I must confess that it's hard for me, the more I steep myself in his work, to know which is which. Oh, I know what looks like prose. I've had that definition for a long time. I know that when the words go all the way to the right-hand side of the page, that's prose. And when this fails to happen, that's poetry. But I wonder sometimes when I read James Still, I find poetry in his prose. So, if you want to go looking for James Still, look in his poems, and look in his prose, in his novels, and his short stories. Here is the best self-description I've been able to find of James Still, and it's in the poem called Of the Wild Man. I took it as the title of my remarks, and it's in the Wolfpen Poems. It will take a little while to find him. He may be in some unlikely place, lying beneath a haw, lost in leafy sleep, or atop a high field digging his keep. He's somewhere around. Go and look. It will take a little while to find him, for hunger drives no wild man home. Dark bays no hasting to a will like his. He may dine on berries and abide where he is. He's somewhere around. Go and look. Those are some of the qualities I think that you'll find that inform his work. And in addition to all that, I must say that I know him to be a forgiving man. Because one time, in my ignorance, I drove him to Concord, New Hampshire, when I should have driven him to Concord, Massachusetts, and he forgave me.
Deals. And I just want to, he's standing back there. Hold your hand up, Monroe. I think Monroe's had about all as he's going to take of this, so we wanted to say he's got his priorities, and he'll just do so much for Mr. Steele, you know. So I just wanted to say, I wanted to point that out. I just want to, again, you know, you go through all these things. I want to thank the committee that put this together with me, and that's Lowell Jones, Ron Eller at the University of Kentucky, Dr. M.K. Thomas at Moorhead College, and a man who put up with me over there for 5 years, and I can tell you that's some doing sometimes. I just, out of college, thought I knew it all, found out how much I didn't know right fast, and he's very tolerant of me, and I want to ask him to give the blessing today, and then we'll have our meal.
May we pray. Our God has made a wonderful earth. He has made these hills and these streams that we come into and that are a habitation for mankind. We, women, men, children, walk in the sun. We look at the beauties of your creation. And more than all else, we love the beauty of the character of the people that you have made to be around us. And this pattern of a man. We're grateful, our God, to come in your care, to rejoice. The earth stands on tiptoe, O God, to reach into your love and care, and so do we. We praise your blessings. Amen.
Thank you, gentlemen. To paraphrase something Wilma Dykeman told me once, somebody told me that each one of these is better than the next one. We all know the poet from Deadmere with his puzzling yarns to share. He is known to entrance with his intricate dance. He's an enigmatic chap, I declare. We're going to lead off this afternoon with Gurney Norman and Georgella Lyon. Gurney says Georgella is leading off. Georgella Lyon is a poet and a playwright and an editor and a teacher. She is from nearby Harlan County. Gurney Norman teaches at the University of Kentucky creative writing. He's the author of divine rights trip. We do mention that in public here. And, and of course, kin folks. Most of you know Gurney and Georgella. So I'll present Georgella Lyon first. Let's welcome her.
I'm glad to be here and have this opportunity to wish Mr. Still a happy birthday and to thank him for the illumination and joy his work always brings me. In River of Earth, the narrator, who is unnamed, although I've heard Mr. Still say he has a name but he's not telling, the narrator tells us, "I was 7 on the 21st of May, and I remember thinking that the hills to the east of Little Car Creek had also grown and stretched their ridged shoulders, and that the beechwood crowding their slopes grew down to a living heart." And indeed, I think our home place has grown larger and deeper because of Mr. Still's perception of it. A major point of that perception to me is Mr. Still's perfect ear. Whether it's in a poem or a short story, a novel, or a children's book, the voice which comes to us is distinct and surprising and exactly right. Listen to Jerb Powell in the short story, The Sharp Tack. Now, Jerb is writing to a fellow who's come back from the Army and who claims to have been to the Holy Land. And Jerb can't believe that he's been to the really, truly Holy Land, which he says is in glory above. And so they're having this argument by correspondence, as I'm sure many of you know. The young man also claims to have brought back a cedar sprig. And so Jerb writes to him, "To show you I'm of a notion to forgive you, I'll say I hope the cedar lives. Shovel barnyard dirt to it. That will make it walk. It promises to become the hurrah of the mountains, a living sermon, a foretaste of eternal life. I wish I had a sprig of it as a token." I think we're here today to celebrate a hurrah of the mountains, and I like to hear Jerb Powell talk about that. Stories such as this call us to listen, to hear the supple humor and music of voices around us. The writing is both discovery of those voices and a kind of reclamation. "I have come back to the long way around," Mr. Still tells us, "the far between, the slow arrival." This poem, White Highways, comes from Hounds on the Mountain, published in 1937, but it expresses a point of view many of us are much too late in coming to. The long way around, that of an organic relationship to one's place and community, is not easy or obvious. It's not the line drawn hard and white from birth to death, which that poem warns against. But in its difficulties, its slow arrival, is the hope for continuity and renewal. The possibility, as Flannery O'Connor says, of reading a small history in a universal light. This is what James Still offers us. It's why I come back to his work again and again, because in it I find, to paraphrase Jack and the Wonder Beans, not common words, not regular words, wonder words. Read them, and they will feed you your life teetotal. I'm going to add a present here to the heap of presents.
I remember when I was 8 years old, or just the day I became 8 years old, my grandmother over here in Lee County, Virginia, decided to have a surprise birthday party for me. And a couple of my uncles conspired to lure me away from the house, and on the pretext of taking me to town to see the movies. But halfway to town, we turned around mysteriously and went back out to Grandma's house, and there were about 40 people, mostly kids. And I was horrified, and my response was to absolutely take off running for the hills. And I was swift of foot in those days, and managed to elude my pursuers for about 2.5 to 3 hours. It was great. I finally was captured and hauled back, and everyone was ready for the cake and ice cream, of course. I don't know if Mr. Still is bolted yet, but I hope he'll stick around for the rest of our proceedings. I thought I would just say a little bit about my own experience of discovery of Mr. Still's work and of him as a friend. I don't know when you all began to read the writings of James Still. I first began to read the work in 1954. I was a high school senior over here in Letcher County, and a librarian who knew that I, at that age, as a senior, had my own interest in writing, called my attention to his work, which our library had. His work hadn't been mentioned in any of the classes, nor in any of the anthologies that we read. And I really appreciated the librarian showing me the work. I read it all that year, then went on to school down at UK, and in addition to continuing to read the stories and the poems and River of Earth, I discovered UK's library and began to go into the back volumes of the magazines and to look for for example, the 1937 and 39 volumes of magazines like Atlantic Monthly and Yale Review, Virginia Quarterly Review, where I knew the stories had previously been published. And I also tried to see what I could find in print that might have been written about Mr. Still. Except for some excellent reviews in the New York papers and the leading magazines, I didn't find anything about him. Then it happened that after my junior year at UK, I was interested in journalism and studying journalism. I got a summer job back in my hometown, which is Hazard, Kentucky, as a reporter and a feature writer for the Hazard Herald. And so I saw my opportunity. I thought, well, I'll call James Still and see if he'll let me come and visit him and talk to me, and I'll write a little article about it. So I called him, and he said, come on over, and I found him taking his nap over here in the library, woke him up, introduced myself, and we spent a great afternoon together. He showed me around the library, and we went out to Deadmere Branch, and he was very generous and good to me, and as he said later, it wasn't the kind of thing that he particularly liked to do, but since I was a local fellow and was for a local newspaper, and the fact that I was young, I was 20 at the time, he allowed this. And so I wrote my little article, and somewhere in the 1958 Hazard Herald back files, my not-so-great article is. I didn't see Jim for many years. Kept up with him through friends that I was making, people like Loyal Jones and others around the mountains. It may have been as late as 1976 that I encountered Jim again. By this time, 1977. By this time, I was a visiting teacher up at UK that spring semester. And Dr. Bryant, the English department, and John Stevenson and I, we arranged to have Mr. Still invited to come and visit my writing class. And so he made the trip down. Pattern of a Man had just been published. Jonathan Green and Noman Press had brought out Pattern of a Man not too long before, in late '76. And so Jim came to the campus, and I remember he remarked as he came onto the campus, It's good to see this campus when the students are here. Said, I've never been here when the students are here, which I think meant he had never been invited to UK before. He delighted my class. We had a really fruitful session, and I had been using Pattern of a Man with my students, and I was among the first teachers who got to use the new book for classroom use. And I remember saying to Jim, I asked him if he was aware that he was about to receive a huge wave of fresh attention and appreciation by a whole new audience that had come into being in the last few years before '77. He looked at me and was totally astonished and disbelieving. Who are these people? Who could they be? Where would they come from? Because certainly in 1958, when Jim and I were visiting here at Hindman at Settlement School, we had no sense of literary community or intellectual community around the Appalachian region. We, of course, like anywhere, there are literary friendships, correspondences. Wilma Dykeman has had the good fortune, and it's mutually so for Jim, of knowing James Still for years. So I'm not trying to say that history begins in 1958. I think we should, in fact, look back and appreciate Mountain Life and Work, that little voice that was with us and continues to be with us as a place that bound together a small community in the mountains of helped create a literary community. But my goodness, look what's happened since then, you see. In 1974, I think we had the first issue of a little magazine from Whitesburg called Mountain Review. Appalachian Journal started about 1972. Al Stewart's Appalachian Heritage began 74 maybe, along in this time. And I remember there was an article, a review written by the writer Don Askins in a 1974 issue of Mountain Review that was reviewing an anthology that had just been published. It was called Who Speaks for Appalachia? And in addition to leaving out Wilma Dykeman, and I think Harriet Arnault is left out, Mr. Still is represented by one poem. And Don Askins shoots this anthology down with a mighty blast, as it deserves, I think. And in doing so, he said that James Still is, in fact, our most elegant and accomplished spokesman. And certainly he's right about that. But what I guess my point is that in 1974, Mr. Still didn't know that, and I don't think was hearing, was aware of the groundswell of new people coming to consciousness in the region. So this event today, I guess I could say, is a kind of a community meeting that was unimaginable in 1958. Then I'll read just the rest of my notes here, since I tried to write this part of it down. So I think that what we have to do today is to acknowledge that, in a sense, we're exploiting James Still today by using his birthday as a chance for us all to get together for this visit. We hope that this occasion is good for him, and maybe there's no guarantee of that. He may have wanted to bolt for the woods some time ago. But it's his generosity of spirit that's present with him and suffuses his writing that he has made himself available to us so that we could convene. And I do know, though, that the occasion is most good for the rest of us. For when we get together like this, here in the mountains, it's like drinking from a fountain of the most nourishing of waters in a way that we all feel. And I think that all of us celebrate, and maybe should more consciously feel good about good things happening in the mountains. Celebrate that we live in a place where literature is immediately usable and nourishing to the people that the literature comes from through its artists. The relationship of artist to community is indeed an intimate one in Appalachia. And I think that's a rare circumstance in all of America. And to me, it's a sign of a cultural health that is unique, and that is our achievement also as readers and as fellow writers. And yet it isn't because James Still writes about Appalachia that we love his work and because the work is enduring. In addition to telling our story, he has set a standard by which stories may be told. And this is, makes this work a treasure and an inspiration for all of us, but particularly, let's say, the young writers who even now are emerging to discover this work for the first time. One of the, I guess Mr. Still is quoted somewhere saying, in talking about how to write, he's had very little to say about that, wisely so, I guess. But I quote him all the time on one of the things of advice to young writers that, that he is quoted in print somewhere. Mr. Still said that the writer should think each word vigorously, close attention to the word. I'm not sure that I have absolutely thought all of my words vigorously, but I wanted to get across the spirit of something and to kind of establish this occasion in a larger context that's been unfolding for many years, and that what is so great about being a writer and a reader and a teacher in this part of the country is that clearly it's a burgeoning thing. But before I sit down, I would like to say that my friend and colleague at UK, Dr. Ron Eller, is going to take the podium just for a second. So Ron is director of the UK Appalachian Center and friend of us all. Ron, thank you.
Thank you, Gurney. I wanted to re-emphasize the point that you made about community. I think Mr. Still's birthday party today gives us a chance to come together once again as a community and to celebrate those relationships that Mr. Still and lots of other writers in the region have helped us to understand over the last few years. Mr. Still, if you'd come forward, I have a couple little tokens of my appreciation for you that I'd like to give to you. First of all, I'd like to, President Singletary at the university asked me to extend to you his birthday greetings.
Thank you.
On this occasion. And we have been very pleased to be able to offer at the University of Kentucky since 1980 a series of fellowships for scholars and writers, actually not only from throughout Appalachia, but from throughout the world, to come to the university to study, to reflect, and to write. And these scholarships are offered in Mr. Still's name and will continue to be offered in the years to come, and we're quite honored to be able to do that. I have for you, Mr. Still, more than 50 letters that James Still Fellows over the last year have sent you and wish you a happy birthday today, collected here in this book for you,
Well,
from the James Still
thank you very
Fellows.
much.
We also have a little thing. We have a photograph of Mr. Still that hangs at the Appalachian Center, and one of our staff did a sketch of that photograph, which we'd like to also present to Mr. Still today. Happy birthday, Mr. Still.
Thank you, Ron, George Allen, Gurney. Bill Weinberg is an educator, an oral historian, and a lawyer. He established the oral history program at Alice Lloyd College, which in its time was one of the best in the country, and whose archives still hold some great material there that can be mined in the future. Bill is co-author of a book out of that collection called Our Appalachia. He has been a member of the Kentucky legislature. He is now a practicing lawyer here in Hindman. But like Gavin Stevens and William Faulkner's stories, he yearns for things more creative and flexible than the law, although some Kentucky lawyers have done some rather inventive things with the law. Bill Weinberg is a friend of James Still, a friend of the settlement, and a friend of people in eastern Kentucky. Now, he ran for Attorney General a couple of years ago in a three-way split and didn't make it, but I want you to take a good look at him. Maybe we can talk him into running for something else again. Let's welcome Bill Weinberg.
Thank you, Lowell. It's a pleasure to be with you. As is usually the case with lawyers, I'm really just a middleman today for what I suppose is an intercepted letter. And when Mike Mullins and I first discovered this letter, I have to confess that I was a bit puzzled by it. You'll note, for one thing, that the edges of the letter are all burnt and singed, and the envelope it came in with the postmark was completely destroyed by fire. It happens to be, as I shortly saw, a letter from Godey Spurlock, and those of y'all familiar with James Still's stories know that Godey appeared to meet his demise by retaliatory rabbit punch. We haven't really known what happened to Godey since that time, and so this letter is certainly of great historical interest to all of us. And it is a birthday letter to James Still, and so I just thought, and Mike thought, that I ought to read it to you, and I will. A letter from Godey, Biggity Creek, July 16th. I might mention, for those who it's been a while, that Old Scratch is a mountain term for the devil. Mr. James Still, Dead Mare's Branch, Kentucky. Chum, I never slept me nary a wink last night. Old Scratch brought me the news that you're signing my name for yours. I didn't understand that until Mike told me that James Still has had the habit in recent years of signing some of his correspondence and notes and memos Godey Spurlock or Godey. Came clear to Biggity Creek. Biggity Creek, where heads are the size of water buckets, where noses are turned up like old shoes, women wear skillets for hats, and men screw their breeches on, and where people are so proper they eat with little fingers out, pointing, and one pea at a time. Old Scratch must have known before I'd live on Biggity Creek, I'd whittle me a bill and peck amongst the chickens. So that's where he sends me. That makes it mean. Anyhow, anybody with one eye and half sense would understand they couldn't steal my name and prosper. I'm a plain talker, and I'm telling you to your teeth, I'll not be slicked out of my good name. When I get mad, I can see little devils hopping in front of my eyes, and I'm mad. A man who'd steal another man's name, upon my word and honor, the devil himself wouldn't claim him. I've checked a bit on you, James Still, and it's not a pretty picture. They say you're tight as Dick's hat band. Can't say farewell to a dollar. The fashion you skimp you ought to be rich as Jay Goode. The most you calculate on is how to dodge spending money, always petting your pocketbook. They tell me you throw ice at the dinner table, big as outdoors. That settlement school's ruined for trick pulling, no two ways talking. And those trips down south, it's not my lookout, but they're liable to hang you to a bush down there. You better check yourself and stick to the mountains. I'll preach you a sermon on that. Now, it's not revenge I'm after. Of course, it does make a body feel a whole heap better. But give me justice. I know my rights. I wasn't born yesterday. Godey Spurlock coming up short ain't been heard of. I don't give knocks I can't take myself. Still, a beating is too fine for you. I want to see you dance, and if you're spoiling the hassle, well, come humping. I guess you thought I was deaf in one ear and can't hear out of the other. Never thought the news would get to Biggity Creek, I reckon. Signing my name for yours indeed. Idiots might swallow that, but not me. As soon as I heard, I got to work straight away. The quicker the medicine, the better the cure. Old Scratch gave me leave. He's keen for mischief. I'm about to offer you a chance too good to refuse. If you'll agree to come to Biggity Creek, you can keep using my name up there. I'll even let you run with my bunch. I'll guarantee you full measure. I can spare it if you can bear it. I've missed many a bucket of slop not being a hog. If not, you better leave Goldie alone or I'll work on your dog hide. Suit yourself and sit on the shelf. Dynamite couldn't budge me. My opinion, when affairs get tough enough, you'll break over and come on down to Biggity Creek with me. Oh, by the way, happy birthday. Keep signing, Goldie Spurlock.
Thank you, Bill. We ought to think about that a minute. I hate to do this on top of that, but I did have one about Goldie here somewhere. Around his characters go, winding a trail to and fro. Were Still's adventures so few that he romps with this crew? Is Goldie his alter ego? At this time, I want to introduce Herb Smith, who's a filmmaker from the Apple Shop theater group, the Appalachian Film Workshop here at Whitesburg. Herb and Elizabeth have been responsible for many of the good films out of Apple Shop, and those of us who try to teach something about this region are very fond of those people indeed, because they've turned out some fine, provocative films that certainly help in class discussion in one thing or another. The latest, well, not the latest release, but Strangers and Kin, Herbie directed, and I think we've made very good use of that. Herb will introduce the other members of the crew.
Thanks, Lon. I take as my text today the book of Pattern of a Man, page 90. Y'all can turn to it if you'd like to. It's called From the story Brother Up to Methuselah. Here on Oak Branch of Ballard Creek, we're nearly all kinfolks. We mostly marry amongst ourselves, live and die where we were born, and don't try to run after the rest of the world. Let one of us get 20 or 30 years along, outlast pneumonia, fever, typhoid, and grippe, we're apt to inhabit this earth a good long spell. 2 or 3 got to be 100 or so. So agey they look like dried cushaws. But not another who started living square over again after they had passed the century mark. I didn't get that right. Let me try to get sentence again. But let me think about it for a minute. I did read this before I stood up here, but I missed the sentence, I'm afraid. But not another who started living square over again after they had passed the century mark, as did Mize Hardburley. He raised a new set of teeth, grew a full head of hair. And on down it says, Uncle Mize was 103 when he began to sprout his hair and teeth. So I think it's appropriate we're here on the 80th birthday of Mr. Still. It's only 23 more years. I'm looking for a new head of hair, a new set of teeth. And I think we're all going to make more new films of the young James Steele. I hope so. No, it is really a joy for me as one of the people of Apple Shop to be here and be a part of this celebration. Mr. Steele has been a neighbor and a friend and an advisor for just about ever since Apple Shop got started. My wife Elizabeth and I lived right across Dead Myers Branch from him for about 2 or 3 years. And so he was our neighbor in the fullest sense of the word. And at first, we didn't really know what to call him, you know. It's like Mr. Steele was real formal for somebody that just lives across the creek from you. And so, you know, I thought maybe I'd call him James, but, you know, like, I was just pretty young, and the young whippersnappers don't have the right to call their elders by names as familiar as that. So I just got to call him neighbor. And so, as I see you now, congratulations, neighbor on 80, and we're pleased to be here. As we lived right across the creek, there was a lot of evenings that Mr. Steele would come over after working in the garden in the cool of the day, and we would talk. And there were lots of kernels of truth that we picked up over those years. And at first, I must say that, you know, even if you are neighbors, you can't say certain things to people right off the bat. And but later on, as we got to know him and got to be good friends, I was over at your house, I think, and we were sitting there in the yard, and you said you were talking about this film, which we're going to show some excerpts of here today, Ourselves in That Promise, and you said, I don't know, I thought a lot about whether I should be in that film. And I said, yeah. He said, well, you know, like Apple Shop, there was a lot of mixed opinions about what you all were doing back then. This is about 75. And it's just after Vietnam War and other things. And we were probably younger then. And maybe a little more wild-eyed. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, so I knew there was some word that he was being careful about. Finally, he just said, you know, a lot of them thought y'all were communist. And I said, yeah, you know, young people all getting together, and then us making films about the region and not praising the coal industry always, but sometimes having a critical slant to some of the things that industrialization is doing to the mountains. And we've been subject to a lot of name calling, and I really think that we appreciate you going ahead and being in this film, even though we maybe haven't always had the best image, and we're working on that, and we're going to try to clean that up, and you know. So he said, now, if y'all had a real clean image, I wouldn't have been in it. So he says, you've got to keep an edge to you. So I think we've got to, you know, sometimes play on both sides of that. And that was one of those little morsels. But mainly what I want to do here is invite other people to Apple Shop to come up and say a few words. We have excerpts from a film that Joe Gray, who's one of the filmmakers at the time, is here. And then I'll be introducing other peoples of Apple Shop. We'd like to have had 30 or 40 people come up here and say a few words. A lot of other people would like to have been on the program, but y'all don't want that, do you? So let me first introduce Joe Gray.